So we haven't learned in 4 weeks. So it's like the American school system. After vacation, you have to relearn everything you learned because you forgot it all. Then when you finish relearning it, what happens? You have vacation again. So you forget it again. Now, I'm not reteaching anything. That's not in the program. But I do want to set the stage, as it were. We're holding chapter 32, Perek Lev, the 32nd chapter in the Tanya, which is known in the Lubavitcher circle as Perek Lev, the heart of the Tanya. And in this chapter, the Alter Rebbe discusses Ahavas Yisrael, love of a fellow Jew, love of a fellow. So it's very appropriate that chapter 32 be Lev. Lev in Hebrew, Lamed Beis, means the heart. By the way, just incidentally, the Torah begins with a Beis, Bereshis, right? We started this week Bereshis, Genesis. And it ends with a Lamed, Le'enei Kol Yisrael. That's also Lev. It says in Svarim that the beginning and the end of the Torah is Lev, the infant hearts, the heart. And of course the idea is, people study Torah, there's a lot of ideas, and much of it is quite scholarly, intellectual. But the key is, it should touch the heart. It should touch the neshama of a person. It should touch us as a human being. So chapter 32 in the Tanya deals with Ahavas Yisrael, the love of a fellow Jew. And the first interesting thing about it is the following. The Tanya was written twice by the author. I've shared this with you numerous times. That over the course of 20 years, approximately, the Alter Rebbe went through 4 developmental steps in what would eventually come out as the published book, the Tanya, which is without a doubt, the Sefer HaYesod, the fundamental work of Chassidus Chabad. Initially, there were private discussions that he had with individual Chassidim. Then later, he shared these ideas in public forums with all the Chassidim. And thirdly, he wrote them down as a treatise for Chassidim to copy and to study. But initially, the plan was never to publish it. He didn't want it to be printed. His idea was that they would be copied. And eventually, these copied Tanyas were forged. Forged by people who did not like the Alter Rebbe, so the forgeries were done in such a way that they communicated ideas which were the opposite of the intent of the author. So when the Alter Rebbe became aware that the Tanya had been adulterated, had been messed with, he published it. He finally printed it. But before printing it, he rewrote the whole book. We have the manuscript. We have the original Tanya. The handwritten Tanya has now been printed as well. And you can compare the 2 books. There are considerable differences between the 2, but they are basically the same design and basically the same order. And one of the interesting things is that the first draft of the Tanya does not have a heart. I'm sorry for putting it that way, but that's the way it is. Chapter 32 is missing. He skips it. And the entire discussion on Ahavas Yisrael, love of a fellow, does not appear in the original Tanya. The original Tanya has 51 chapters. The final version has 53 chapters, and there's a number of differences, big differences, in addition to numerous little differences. When the Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya originally, he did not have this chapter on Ahavas Yisrael. And the way it's explained is when the Tanya was written the first time, the Alter Rebbe was able to communicate Chassidus to the mind, but not bring it down to the heart. When he rewrote the Tanya, the ideas of Chassidus were brought down to the human heart, not just to the mind. And this is this chapter, chapter 32. It's a very special chapter. Chassidim have a custom that when they memorize, people have a tradition to memorize Tanya by heart, they begin with this chapter which talks about love of a fellow Jew. Talking about love of a fellow sounds like the simplest thing in the world. Of course. It's fundamental to society, to human interaction, is that people should be nice to one another, kind to one another, tolerant of one another, forgiving of one another. The fact of the matter is that as simple an idea as it is complicated to achieve. We all know how incredibly difficult it is to include even one more person in our circle, let alone to open ourselves up to love everybody. It's easy to say, incredibly difficult to do. Incredibly difficult to do. And the Alter Rebbe devotes chapter 32 in the Tanya to this discussion about love of a fellow. Having said this, let me bring you into context. In other words, let's apply the discussion that we're going to have to what we've been learning in the last few classes. As you know, let me give you an aside. I'll give you a tangent. I'm involved with a project for an organization. It's called JLI, Jewish Learning Institute. It's a Chabad subsidiary. It's a beautiful organization, mamish, a class act. And I recently became involved with them. And we're having a conversation about Hasidus. What did Hasidus achieve? So I shared with one of the authors, one of the editors, an idea in Hasidus as well. It's not the impression that I got from learning the Tanya. Because I gave it this very, very exalted, esoteric thought. And she says, well, I edited this course on the Tanya, and I got a very different impression of Hasidus. I said, yes, there's a difference between Hasidus and the Tanya. The Tanya is a very, very unique book, even within the world of Hasidus. Because what's so exciting about the Tanya, both in terms of what's good about the Tanya and in terms of what's challenging about the Tanya, is that the Tanya confronts the Yetzer Hara head on. The Tanya confronts the evil inclination, what we call the animal soul, honestly, straight. And says, listen, every human being is two. We're one human being, but we have two drives. And the two drives have entirely different interests. And life is the conflict, it's the tension between these two drives. And success and failure as a person, and certainly as a religious person, is to give predominance, to give victory to the godly soul, to the idealistic soul, over the animal soul, over the selfish and short-sighted and short-term soul. But this is what's so special about the Tanya. The Tanya deals with the animal soul and doesn't deny it. And says, listen, we all have a Yetzer Hara. And because we have an animal soul, we have a Yetzer Hara, if you will, we have to be realistic. Now, the Tanya sets a standard which is very, very high, but the Tanya sets a standard which is very, very honest. And I'll share with you another insight. Now, for this I can get into trouble. But I'll say it anyway. There is a Hasidus called Breslev. You've heard of Breslev, Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, right? Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, 200th yahrzeit is this year. I think he passed away Tishrei. I think he recently had his yahrzeit. Nachman Breslev passed away in 18... Oh, his yahrzeit was last week. His 200th yahrzeit. He didn't have successor. Nachman Breslev was not succeeded by any Rebbe. And there are people alive today who are still his Hasidim. So, that itself tells you how incredibly holy a person he was. 200 years after he passes, there's a real viable Hasidus called Breslev. They're viewed as interesting, and so is Chabad. We're also viewed as interesting, so we have this in common. Rabbi Nachman Breslev wrote a book called Likutei Moharan. It's written during his lifetime. It's well over 200 years old. And without getting into all of the issues of Hasidus Breslev, and I certainly don't want to say anything not positive, I heard, and I believe it. I believe it because it makes so much sense to me. I've read parts of Nachman's Sefer, the Likutei Moharan. Not a lot of it, but I've read parts of it. And Breslev and Hasidim are very proud of themselves. Just like Lubavitcher Hasidim are proud of themselves. Everybody's very proud of themselves. And they believe that they have the most perfect Hasidus, the greatest tzaddik. He was a direct descendant of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov's great-grandson. An incredibly holy person. So I heard that somebody once asked the Rebbe in a Yechidus, in a private audience, our Rebbe, the current Rebbe, what's the difference between the Tanya and the Likutei Moharan? Between the Tanya of the Alter Rebbe and Rabbi Nachman Sefer Likutei Moharan. This is what I heard, so that the Rebbe said to him that the Tanya Sefer Shal Beinenu. It's a book for intermediates. And the Likutei Moharan is a Sefer Shal Tzaddik. You've heard this before. That the Rebbe says it's a book for the righteous, for the Tzaddik. So when someone repeated this to a Breslev Achad, I said, you see, even the Lubavitcher Rebbe admits that the Likutei Moharan is a higher sefer than the Tanya. So the Lubavitcher Achad says to him, it's true, but you ain't no tzaddik. And that's where the issue comes in. If you've ever read the Breslev Sefer, the Likutei Moharan, he talks about God and about faith and about self-sacrifice. And there's no I as a very, very simple matter of fact. In other words, I'm not an expert on the Bres of Chassidus, and I don't want to make that impression. But from the little bit that I have read, what is special about the Tanya is that the Tanya concedes that life's a struggle, a religious struggle. In the Likutei there's no struggles. It's just everything's holy, and everything is God, and everything is faith, and just trust God, and everything will work out. And for tzaddikim, that's the method. That's the way it works. But for non-tzaddikim, you need to have the Tanya. Because the Tanya says, listen, we have an animal soul, we have a Yetzer Hara, we have an evil inclination, we have a selfish animal tendency. And life is about doing our best. But the Tanya says, let's be honest about the animal soul. Let's be honest about the negative tendencies so that we can set for ourselves goals that are realistic. We set for our goals that are possible for us to achieve. The Alter Rebbe says he doesn't expect the ordinary Jew to be inspired with incredible passions for God. He doesn't expect the ordinary Jew to experience the delight of godliness. Why not? Because they have an animal soul. He expects the ordinary Jew to do something very simple. To control himself. That's all. Just to control yourself. How often? 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, no days off. That gets kind of difficult. But it's realistic. So the Tanya is unique. The truth of the matter is, Tanya is unique even in Chassidus, even in Chabad Chassidus, that it recognizes the Yetzer Hara and says, I'm going to teach you how to serve the Eibishter with the full awareness that there's a part of ourselves that's lazy, that's depressed, that's selfish, that's angry, that's not in the mood. And let's work from this point of view. And this is what we've been learning. I don't know what number of classes, I think we're up to 34 or 35, but this is what we've been learning now in this cycle. For us, this is round 3. This idea, we have a Yetzer Hara, we're not ignoring it, but we're trying to learn what's the true potential, what's the true possibility of an ordinary Jew who has a Yetzer Hara. How far can he go and how high can he reach? And one of the points that's been recently underscored, recently emphasized, is the idea of priority. Priority means considering the fact that I have an animal soul, of a Yetzer Hara, and considering the fact that I'm a Jew, a Jewish soul, I'm a human being, I have a higher soul, and I have to live. What am I going to make the center of my identity? And what am I going to make the additional aspect? What's going to be who I am, and what's going to be what I'm dealing with? And in the most recent class, the form that the Alter Rebbe proposed for this question was, and these are 2 very important quotes, Itzavin Haguf, the sadness of the physical world, and Simchas HaNefesh, the joy of the soul. Every person, every moment in his life has 2 issues. The cup is half full and the cup is half empty. Pick. Now, when the cup is half full and the cup is half empty, it's the same cup. So whatever you've chosen the same cup. But when you choose to focus on the fact that the cup is half empty, it's depressing. And when you choose to focus on the fact that the cup is half full, it's exciting. Not easy, but exciting. And the Alter Rebbe makes a proposal. At every moment, every Jew has 2 choices. I can say being religious in this world is a conflict. Being religious in this world is an uphill battle. Being religious in this world is like being an alien. I'll do it, but I hate it. I'll do it. Hashem gave me Torah mitzvahs. He told me what to do. I'll live as He chooses. I will follow His instructions. I'll try to believe in Him. I'll try to feel inspired by Him. I'll try to have a relationship with Him. But the world is against me. And because the world is against me, my baseline, my fundamental sense of self is, I am living a life which is against the grain. And it happens to be the truth. That is true. The alternative is to say, I have a soul, I have a connection to God, and I'm going to make that the center of my life. The Yetzer Hara is not going to disappear. The struggles of life, the challenges of the real world are not going to go away. But I am going to choose to make my priority, my center, what I consider real, the fact that I have a soul, and as a result, I have a special connection to Hashem. What's the real difference between the 2? The real difference between the 2 is whether my Yiddishkeit is going to be sad, depressed, or excited and joyous. And in Hasidus, there's nothing more elementary, nothing more core, nothing more important than this idea of finding a way of not just being Jewish, but being positively Jewish. Jewish in a joyous way. And the joyousness of Judaism comes from the fact that I choose to accentuate, I could choose to make more important my neshama than my guf, my nefesh, my body, and my animal soul. In different words, every minute, the Yetzer Hara puts doubt in our mind, puts questions in our heart, puts burden into our lives. And the godly soul says, you have a connection to God. Every moment we have this, we are on this precipice, we are at this junction, we're at this space. The bottom line is you have to do what Hashem said. You have to keep Shabbos, you have to keep kosher, you have to keep Tarsam Mishpacha, you have to put on tefillin. You have to do what the Eibishter says. But if I do as Hashem says and look at the junction, at the fork in the road that is my life, and say, the world is against me, there's going to be a sadness in my Yiddishkeit. If I come to the very same space in the road, the same exact fork, and I say to myself, I have a special connection to Hashem, a special connection to the Creator, the same challenges is going to be very, very positive. And the message of the Tanya is, be b'simcha. Focus on the positive and be joyous in your struggle, although the struggle never ends. A human being, b'chlal, human beings in general, especially human beings who want to control their animal urges, is in a constant state of struggle. A state of struggle which never subsides. It doesn't go away. It's not like you get older, so the animal is calm. Maybe the animal changes form. But we are constantly dealing with two eyes, two us's. The I who wants to be connected to something higher, and the I that is burdened by life, by reality. And Hasidus says, you have both of those eyes, make the center of your world, your neshama, and de-emphasize your animal soul. This is essentially the most recent topic we have explored. Having said that, we'll move on to chapter 32. Okay? Chapter 32 talks about Ahavat Yisrael, to love a fellow, as I said. Let's begin from the beginning. It says in the Torah, V'yahavta l'recha kamocha. It's a pasuk in Chumash, in Parashat Kedoshim. V'yahavta l'recha kamocha, which means, love your fellow kamocha as you love yourself. It's a passage in the Torah. V'yahavta l'recha kamocha. You should love your fellow as you love yourself. So the question immediately arises. Love your fellow as you love yourself? Never going to happen. Cannot be. It can't. It's hepachateva. I should love my fellow as I love myself? It's not possible. Adam kodav eitzalatmi. The love that we have for ourselves is the blindest and the most irrational love that could possibly exist. And believe it or not, that's actually a good thing to a great degree. How can I love somebody else exactly as I love myself? It's neged achush. It's unnatural. It's impossible. How could the Torah say, love your fellow as you love yourself? So there are essentially two levels of resolution to this question. The Hashem gives us a commandment, love somebody else like you love yourself, and reality says cannot be. So there's two ways of resolving this question. The first is the simpler way. And it's based on Rabbi Akiva's version of that statement. Love your fellow as you love yourself, says Rabbi Akiva. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. It's an important principle in Torah. It's a very great principle in Torah. When Rabbi Akiva says, love your fellow as you love yourself, is a great principle in Torah, Rabbi Akiva says that Avas Yisrael, loving your fellow, does not represent all of Judaism. It represents half of Judaism. Klal Gadol means a great category. But there are other great categories. V'yahavta l'recha kamocha is half of Judaism. Which half of Judaism is it? The half of Judaism which is called Ben Adam Lachavero, between man and fellow. Half of Judaism between man and man. Half of Judaism is between man and God. Rabbi Akiva says, love your fellow as you love yourself is a half of the religion. It has to do with the interpersonal relationships between two human beings. Love your fellows, love yourself. How does this work? It's very simple. It's very simple, and again, I'm skipping a lot of steps because we don't have 10 hours. It's very simple. Love doesn't mean to love. It means treat lovingly, behave in a loving way, do unto others. Rabbi Akiva's resolution to this question is to say, half of Judaism is the relation between man and his fellow, and the half doesn't mean to love. You're never going to love someone like you love yourself. But you can act towards somebody else like you would act to yourself. This is resolution A to the question. Okay? Pardon me, but I'm going to repeat myself. The Torah says, you have to love your fellow, you love yourself. Question is, it's impossible. So Rabbi Akiva's resolution, based on the interpretations that are given to Rabbi Akiva's resolution, is, it doesn't mean love, it means behave lovingly. Treat in a loving way. And this is actually the law. If you open up Rambam, look in Shulchan Aruch, look in Jewish law. When Jewish law gets to this section about loving your fellow, it translates the word love, behave towards. Treat lovingly. Because the law, the halacha, has to be realistic. And in reality, there's no way you could love somebody else as you love yourself. It's simply impossible. So this is what we would call the Nigla resolution. The Talmudic, the halachic, the practical dimension of Judaism would say, you can't love somebody else as you love yourself. So why does the Torah say love? It means treat lovingly. Okay? Good, so far so good? But there's another Talmudic statement. And the second Talmudic statement is where the controversy begins and ends. And that is Hillel's words. Hillel was the teacher of the teacher of the teacher of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva's teacher was Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, whose teachers were Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, whose teacher was Hillel. And Hillel says that Avat Yisrael, love your fellows, love yourself, is kol ha-Torah kula. It's the whole religion. It's not half, it's all. In other words, included in loving yourself as you loving somebody else, pardon me, as you love yourself, is also included keeping Shabbos and keeping kosher and not wearing wool and linen together, and issues that have nothing to do with human beings. So when Hillel says that the whole Judaism is represented by loving a fellow, a problem arises. What does Shabbos have to do with loving another person? What does kosher have to do with loving another person? You follow? So Rashi has a solution. Rashi on the Gemara Masechta Shabbos says that the Hillel says, God's your friend also. Be nice to him too. The Gemara, Rashi says it in the Gemara Masechta Shabbos, Hashem is also your friend. And therefore, loving your friends, love yourself, means all of your friends, not just the friends on the block, but the friend that's your conscience, the Eibishter. He's also your friend, and therefore the whole religion is included in Meflech Kabbalah. This is one resolution. But now we get to Chassidus. Chassidus says, V'ahavta l'recha kamoicha, means loving your fellow, you love yourself, according to Hillel's version, in all of Judaism. Why? Because Chassidus holds, and this is the point of tonight's class, that this question of how you could love another person exactly as you love yourself has an answer. There's a way of explaining it. In other words, it's actually possible to love another human being precisely as you love yourself, which I'll get to momentarily. But what am I going to do first? Repeat myself. Okay? Let's start over from the beginning. The Gemara, the pasuk says, "V'yahavta l'recha kamoicha." It's a passage in the Chumash. Love your fellows, you love yourself. There are two Talmudic sources for the interpretation. Rabbi Akiva says it's a very important principle in Judaism. We assume that Rabbi Akiva says it's an important principle in Judaism because he interprets love to mean treat, behave towards. But Hillel says it's all of Judaism, including the half of Judaism that has to do with God and man. Which leads us to the Hasidic interpretation of L'nech Kamaycha, which means that it's in fact entirely possible for another Jew to love himself, to love another Jew exactly as he loves himself. How? Simple. But simple is not simple at all. Simple as Hasidus. The answer is the following. We all have a soul, a godly soul. The soul of joy, as opposed to the soul of sadness. And the level of the soul, there are no separations. We're all one. The divisions are the body, are the ego, are the selfish interests, are the reality of the world. the neshama, the level of the godly soul, the level of the neshama, were one. This has to do with a very, very involved Kabbalistic idea, which we've discussed it earlier. We had it in chapter 2, but it's relevant now again, so we'll revisit it. According to Kabbalah, with the Jewish mysticism, and it's especially clearly articulated in the writings of the Arizal, Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, the first human beings, had within themselves every life, every human life, especially every Jewish human life, that will ever come from them. In mystical terms, they had what's called general souls, nishamot klaliyot. Their souls encompassed within them literally millions and billions of souls. Just like, think of it in biological terms, you have in a human body many cells, right? There are billions of cells, maybe trillions of cells within a human body. Each one is, on the one hand, distinct. At the same time, in each cell, there's a nucleus, there's a center where you have a genetic code, the DNA, which encompasses the whole body. Similarly, Adam and Chava had incredibly massive, very large souls. Included in their collective soul would be all of the sparks that would radiate, that would come from them. And therefore, their souls are, so to speak, parent souls. They're souls that incorporate, that encompass all the souls of Jewish people that would ever come into existence later on. And according to Zohar, and according to Kabbalah, the original soul of Adam and Chava radiate, they divide up into 7, which are represented physically by Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and so forth. In other words, the soul of Adam Edish, the first person, that includes the souls of all those who are going to come later, is divided up into 7 branches. Each branch is the source of 1/7 of all souls that are going to develop later. And then it radiates downward. Think of it as a pyramid. Souls radiate downward. The lower you go, the more diverse, the more detailed the souls become. Until on the lowest levels, this is the Kabbalistic number. Okay, take it or leave it. This is the Kabbalistic number that's brought. There are 600,000 souls, root souls. In other words, 600,000 Jews had to be born. But each one of those 600,000 souls has 600,000 sparks, which means 600,000 branches from a root soul which could have been born, that may be born. If you do the math, 600,000 times 600,000, that's 6 times 6 plus 10 zeros is 360 billion souls. That's a lot of human beings. Does that mean that this many Jews have existed? There's a Gemara that mentions such a number, but presumably this is a mystical concept. Not every single soul has to completely manifest. And this is what the idea of Gilgulim, reincarnation. Right? When a soul comes back again, it's not the same soul again. It's like a spark from a parent soul. And when that soul reincarnates again, it's a spark from the secondary soul, and so forth. Until, theoretically, there's 360 billion neshamas. Adam is one human being that encompasses 600,000 sparks. And those 600,000 sparks each have potentially a possibility of 600,000 subsidiary souls, secondary souls. The point is this, the relevant point is this. The nature of the Jewish soul is that it's related to all other Jewish souls. Just as biologically, parents and children, and to a lesser degree and in a slightly different way, siblings, have a core connection, have a relationship which is beyond reason, because they literally made of the same material, made of the same stuff, the same genetic material, they have the same tendencies, the same personalities, the same priorities, and so forth and so on. So the love that parents have for children is almost like self-love. You love your children because they're a piece of you. And in a different way, the love between biological relations, especially siblings, brothers and sisters, is a very, very powerful love, because they're literally made from the same piece, the same stuff. In the Chumash we read that Miriam was ill, and Aaron pleads with their younger brother Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, that he should pray for her. And he says to Moshe Rabbeinu, if you don't pray for Miriam's recovery, it's like half of you was eaten away. That's how Aaron describes it. Because you come from the same place. And in your parents, in Amarim and Yocheved, Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam are the same. Okay, now they've become three different human beings. But they come from one source. If Moshe Rabbeinu would not daven on behalf of Miriam, it's like half of Moshe would be eaten up. Because they come from the same source, they come from the same root, they come from the same essence. In a mystical way, it's true of all Jewish people. We have a familial connectedness on a spiritual level, on a mystical level. All souls are interconnected. So what makes us diverse, what makes us distinct, what makes us separate is the world. We're born to different communities, born to different homes, we're born to different times, in different places, in different environments, and we're all born to different bodies, which have all the bodily needs that are distinct to each one of us. All of those things make us individuals, and all of those things make us selfish. All of those things make the center of our reality ourselves, and our relationships become secondary to that. Says the Alter Rebbe, that's the physical reality. The mystical reality, the spiritual reality, the neshama reality is that on a spiritual level we're one. On the level of the neshama there's a oneness between souls. So Alter Rebbe says, the Torah says, it says in the Chumash, love your fellow as you love yourself. On a body level, it's impractical. On a level of a physical human being, it cannot be. You can't love another person as you love yourself. Which is why Jewish law, the practical dimension of Judaism, says no one's expecting you to love someone like you love yourself. You can't possibly do that. But we're expecting you to treat someone like you want to be treated. Behave towards your fellows you want to be behaved towards. But Chassidus, Kabbalah, mysticism, speaks of a higher world. It speaks of a spiritual plane, of a spiritual dimension. And it says, listen, if you can get in touch with your soul, which is not easy at all, but in the language of the Tanya, if you can get in touch with what we call the joy of the soul, in other words, if you can make the priority of your life the joy of being a spiritual being, rather than the heaviness of being a physical person. As I explained to you in the introduction, we constantly deal, we're always in that space. We're always at that junction. What's the reality of me? The heaviness of the real world, or the delight and the elation of the spiritual world? Both are true. But which am I? Who am I? What defines me? It's an incredible question and a great struggle. But if a person can make themselves an individual whose identity is the delight of the soul and the joy of spirituality, you can love another person as you love yourself. Because on that level, we're not separate. So you have really two Torahs and two worlds that don't collide, they converge. The revealed Torah, the practical Torah, the halachic Torah, talks to the person, to the body, and says you can't love another person as you love yourself. Treat him that way. Mysticism, Kabbalah, Chassidus give you a higher version of the same Torah. And Kabbalah and Chassidus tells you, listen, there is a space where the commandment in the Torah, love somebody else like you love yourself, is not a euphemism. It's not an allegory. It's literally true. It's possible to love another human being as you love yourself. It just means making yourself into another kind of human being. If you can make yourself into a spiritually centered person, or a person whose center is their spiritual selves, you can love another person as you love yourself. What I'm saying in different words is this. None of us here is a great expert on the Torah, right? The great experts in the Torah are very, very few, and very far between. But we know enough to know that every word, every thought in the Torah has many different interpretations. And that's part of the beauty of the Torah, the diversity. And one of the most exciting things when you learn Torah is that you don't have to pick and choose. You can pick them all. Practically, when it comes to doing the mitzvahs, you can only do them one way. But philosophically, when it comes to the spirituality, when it comes to the neshama of Torah, one of the most beautiful things is to hear how diverse one passage is. I have a weekly Pasha class, which I might as well advertise. You can find some of them on my website. Here's exactly what I do. I take a passage in the Torah, I just pile on commentaries. And it's exciting to see one passage open up like a flower. You can read it in not just various different ways, but conflicting ways, completely different interpretations. And it's part of the beauty of the Torah of how incredibly plastic, incredibly flexible and diverse one thought in the Torah is. So here's a passage in the Torah. Love your fellow as you love yourself. So we have two voices. One voice says impossible. And therefore says, it doesn't mean love. It says treat. So of course, right away you scratch your head and say, if God meant treat, he should have said so. Right? So there's a second voice that says, no, it's entirely practical. But a different dimension. On a higher level. On a spiritual level. So this passage, love your fellow as you love yourself, on the most basic level of Torah, cannot be understood literally. It has to be understood as an allegory. On a higher level, the same passage becomes real. You can love somebody else and love yourself. All you got to do, and this is not a simple all you got to do, is be in touch with the neshama. And this is one of the key, constant messages of Chassidus. Be a spiritual person. Being a spiritual person doesn't mean that you visit psychics and imagine yourself seeing angels. Being a spiritual person means view Yiddishkeit, not as your challenge, not as your burden, but your joy and your freedom. In Yiddishkeit, in Torah and mitzvahs, we're free people, not slaves. In Yiddishkeit, we're higher. We have a connection to a higher realm, a higher reality, a much more meaningful sense of self. And reality is not going to go away. The bills are not going to stop coming. The arrogant bully neighbors are still going to be arrogant and bully neighbors, but it's a choice. And now the Rebbe says, if we can succeed, and to say it more practically, to the extent to which we can succeed, to making ourselves spiritual people, we will find that loving another person is an extension of loving yourself. It's an incredible insight. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, what do you mean by love? Like,
ultimately, it means exactly what it says. No, empathy is not love.
what do you mean?
I have to translate love for you?
People don't, you don't love your friend the way you love your family. It's impossible.
It's a different, right. So the whole message is that it's impossible on a biological level.
So I'm saying, are you supposed to
But
love
it's
your
not,
friend like your family?
yeah. Could you imagine that?
No.
Spiritually, we are family. Practically, biologically, we're not family. On the level of the neshama, we're all family. Just as you understand that the love for a family is an irrational love. And it comes down to genetics.
Right.
So the genetics, the Kabbalistic genetics says we're all family.
You're supposed to think of them like your family?
You're supposed to work on becoming a spiritual person.
I don't see the connection. You know what I mean?
You don't? To me, it's very simple. The connection is... Okay. I'll tell you the story I told you last time. I told you the story several times. It's such a powerful story, if you think about it. Before World War II, you've heard the story from me before. I'm just repeating it to help us get through this. Before World War II, being an Orthodox Jew, being frum was very, very difficult. Incredibly difficult. To the extent that virtually all Europeans who came here religious, and if not they, then their children abandoned the religion. The reality was, the reason this happened was because there was no Jewish education, which is mind-blowing. I mean, there were millions of Jews and there were no Jewish schools, which is so hard to comprehend. But the Achilles heel, the reason nothing happened, was Shabbos. I mean, my grandfather who passed away a couple of years ago, grew up in a home where his father would come home all the time on a Friday afternoon and say he was fired by a Jewish boss when he told him he's not coming in Saturday. It was a 6-day work week. And there were no chochmas. You didn't come in Saturday, you had no job on Monday. He said, how many times are you going to lose your job and your family is going to suffer? My grandfather told me once, Yossi, you don't know how it feels to come home from school and find your furniture on the sidewalk. I've repeated it 100 times. I've thought about it 10,000 times. It's pretty spooky. We're not talking about Soviet Russia where life had no value. We're talking about America. And America was incredibly good to the Jews. Nobody should make any mistakes about it. I mean, Jews found here a haven we haven't had at least in hundreds of years, maybe longer. But America was and is and always will be, I think, a nation that worships the almighty dollar. It's about productivity, it's about work. Nobody has ever worked in the history of the world as hard as Americans do. It's about making money. They call it success. We can debate that another time. And when they had a 6-day work week, you didn't work Saturday, you didn't work a whole week. So I would say 90, maybe more, 90% of the Jews who came here couldn't withstand the test of Shabbos. They would go to shul, they had their early minyan. 7 o'clock minyan on Shabbos morning, they went to shul, they read the Torah, and they got on the train and went to work. Now, desecrating the Shabbos is an inviolable sin. A person that desecrates the Shabbos is not, it's the worst. There's only one other sin which is equal to desecration of Shabbos, and that's idol worship. So there were very few people in this country who kept frum in spite of Shabbos. My mother's family, they were frum, they suffered, they were so poor and so on, and they have now generations of American Jews who are Yireim Mishleimim, but most of the people they knew sooner or later gave in to the test of Shabbos. It was unbearable. So it was a Jew who came to the Moshe Feinstein. The Moshe Feinstein was a great Rav. He was the Pesach in America. He was the Pesach Ador. He passed away in 1986. He was a very, very great person. And he became the undisputed Pesach. Every question on halacha in America, and perhaps in other parts of the world as well, even in Israel, that was controversial, he was not afraid. He was a great man. The Rabbi sent people to him all the time. And Rabbi Shavashi was a sweetheart. He was a very, very kind man, a sweet, sweet Jew. So a Jew comes to him with a complaint. He says, I raised my children in the 20s and the 30s, through the Depression and all the rest. And I was the only one and all the people I knew around me who never violated the Shabbos. And I suffered for it. My family suffered for it. How come my children are not religious? You know, Mele, those who desecrated the Shabbos, so what do you want? You desecrate Shabbos, why should your kids keep Shabbos? But I withstood that temptation. My wife and I suffered through those hard, lean years. How come my children are not religious? So Ramesha told him like this, tell me. It's a painful answer, and no one is judging this person, but it still makes the point. He says, you kept Shabbos, and you have to be admired for it. But were you optimistic about Shabbos, or did you feel like a prisoner by Shabbos? In other words, did you enjoy, did you celebrate your keeping of the Shabbos, or did you bemoan it and say, as the expression used to be, it's so difficult to be a Jew, it's a shred as I know you. He says, Rabbi, I kept Shabbos, but I didn't enjoy it at all. I hated it. I resented it. I resented it. He says, that's the answer. In other words, a Jew living in America who can't find work because of the money that's going to Shabbos has to do it b'simcha to live off. In other words, if you're going to be frum, you can do it. But feel like Yiddishkeit and the world are a conflict which puts you in a depressed state. This is reality. It is reality. Or you could say, I am going to live the values of my soul, my neshama, and I'm going to enjoy. I'm going to celebrate Yiddishkeit. Life is not going to change. The challenges are not going to go away, but I am not going to be a depressed person and say, woe unto me, I'm Jewish and I'm Orthodox. I know about Torah and mitzvahs. I'm going to celebrate the neshama. And the Alter Rebbe says, when you make that choice, you make yourself a spiritual human being. And when you make that choice and make it a spiritual human being, the notion of loving every Jew like family becomes much more realistic. Just think about it, that's all. Think about it. I'm not holding there by any stretch of the imagination. But I can understand what Alter Rebbe is saying. When you are an neshama person, when you live a life based on spirituality, altruism is true. It's not fanciful. It's not nonsense. It's not unrealistic, because it's a whole different level of being. So Torah, our religion, speaks to both levels. Torah speaks to the basic level and says, I'm not going to hold it against you for being Orthodox and feeling like you're a prisoner in this world. And on that level, I agree with you. You cannot love somebody else like you love family, like you love yourself. But there's a higher plane. There's a different dimension, which is what Chassidus and Kabbalah are about. On this higher dimension, you are celebrating Yiddishkeit. You're celebrating your neshama. You're not allowing yourself to become depressed by the conflict between Yiddishkeit and what America is about. When you live there, you can love another Jew like you love family. You can love another Jew like you love yourself, because we are family on the spiritual level. I'll tell you something very interesting. It's so interesting to watch how an idea evolves from Kabbalah into Chassidus. There's a tradition which the Rebbe wanted years ago to make universal. He announced it as a campaign that all Jews should say it. But it's in our Siddur, it's in the Chabad Siddur, because our Siddur is based on the Arizal's Kabbalah. Arizal never wrote a Siddur, but he wrote meditations, and our Siddur is based on his meditation. And that is, every morning we get up in the morning, and before we begin to pray, we say these words. It's appropriate for one to say before he prays, I accept upon myself to love my fellow as I love myself. Every morning you should say that Arizal says, I accept upon myself to love my fellow as I love myself. Now, I suppose some of us would say, I'm not going to say it, I don't want to be a liar and a hypocrite. But the Siddur says, say it, say it. And the Rebbe spoke about, say it, say it. What's so interesting is, if you looked into the Arizal, the source of this phrase, you would be quite surprised, maybe even shocked, by the reason for it. And in Hasidus, this idea develops, it evolves into a completely different idea. Here is the Arizal's reason. This is the Kabbalistic reason for why you should get up in the morning and say, I accept upon myself the positive commandment of loving every Jew like I love myself. He gives you a very interesting meditation, a mystical thought. Jewish people are connected to one another like cells are to a body. We're sparks that ultimately have one center. The center is Adam Marish. And just as in a human body, that there are numerous cells, and each cell is distinct, and each cell has within it the whole genetic code, each cell has within it the whole body. Similarly, every individual Jew, each one of us, has within ourselves every other Jew, every other person, every Yid alive today in this world. And then he continues. It says in the Torah, it says in Leviticus, that when a person brings a sacrifice, it has to be perfect. You're not allowed to bring a sacrifice to God which is blemished, which is wounded, which is deficient. So when you pray, you daven, and the Gemara says, Tfilas b'makom kabbanas tiknum, the prayer that we do now takes the place of a sacrifice. You're giving yourself to God. If you're giving yourself to God, as the laws of sacrifice prescribe, you have to give yourself to God completely. What if you hate the Jew? It means you hate a part of yourself. It means you hate a part of yourself. And the part of yourself that you hate, you're not giving to God. So the sacrifice is incomplete, so the sacrifice is deficient. Before you pray, make yourself love every Jew so that your prayer should be whole. What a selfish reason to be altruistic. It's so ironic. But this is the Kabbalistic reason for this passage in the Siddur. I accept upon myself to love every Jew, love myself. Why? Because I want to be whole. And I'm not whole if I hate another person, because that means I'm not whole with myself. So in order for my prayer to be Tamam Yilaratz, to be a perfect sacrifice, I have to be one with every other Jew on the planet, so that I'm one with myself. Now Chassidus says, of course, it's not just about our prayers being accepted. It's about loving every Jew. What about the fact that it's impossible? Especially impossible to love somebody else as you love yourself. And the answer is, if you choose a life where the center of it is the joy of the soul, it's possible. And this is the message of chapter 32. And I know this is repetitive, but I'm going to say it anyway. So you have a passage in the Torah that says love another person like you love yourself. That on the basic levels of Judaism is an unrealistic passage. But it's written there because on a deeper level of Judaism, on a spiritual level of Judaism, on a mystical level of Judaism, it's realistic. And it is possible. Which leads us to another interesting idea. Very interesting idea. Hillel says, love your fellow as you love yourself is the whole religion. The 613 commandments in the Torah that go under two broad areas, right? Bein adam lachavere, bein adam lamakam. Between man and God and man and fellow. Hillel says the whole Judaism is underscored by one commandment: love your fellow as you love yourself. What's the wisdom here? How can you make all 630 commandments, including those commandments that have nothing to do with people, that are just between you and God? How can you make all of Judaism evolve from, radiate from the commandment to love your fellow, you love yourself. It says, Rabbi says, it's a very simple thing. Judaism has two purposes according to Kabbalah. In the mystical world, in the spiritual world, there are two purposes for Judaism. Number one, to raise up the soul. God created us, put us in this world, and says, your challenge is not just to keep the Torah mitzvahs, but to accentuate your soul, to become a spiritual person. To become a person whose reality is a spiritual reality. And if one, and when one, and to the extent to which one succeeds in accentuating the neshama, you can love a fellow as you love yourself. So the Alter Rebbe says all of Judaism comes down, let's put it this way, to translating v'ahavta l'recha kamoicha literally as opposed to figuratively. We're all born, we're told by God, love your fellows, you love yourself, and we tell God that's not possible. So God says, okay, don't love, just act lovingly. But the test, the purpose, is that we should go from acting lovingly to in fact loving. Because if we can succeed in bringing out the neshama and making that the priority in our life, we can love another person to love ourselves. So all of Judaism is reflected in how we feel towards other human beings. All 613 mitzvahs are measured in v'ahavta l'recha kamoicha. If we have succeeded, and this is a big if, and not an easy one, to love another person as we love ourselves, that is a proof that we have, at least to some degree, emphasized or raised up the neshama, the joy of the soul and the elation of the spirit, over the sadness and the depression of what we call reality, and made ourselves into a spiritual being, which is kol ha-Torah kula. All of Judaism is about bringing forward the soul. All of Judaism comes down to trying to become a spiritual person. That doesn't mean observant, doesn't mean orthodox. It means full of joy in our observance, full of light in our orthodoxy, because we don't feel like prisoners. We're free in Yiddishkeit. So v'ahavta l'recha kamoicha becomes a test, becomes a measure. If we love all Jews as we love ourselves, which is not a simple matter at all, that becomes proof that we've achieved what Yiddishkeit wants, in part to raise the soul over the body, to define ourselves by our spiritual selves rather than by our practical selves, by our so-called realistic or reality-based self. That's point one. Okay? So again, Hillel says all of Yiddishkeit comes down to loving your fellow as you love yourself. What's the wisdom here? What's the logic to this? The wisdom and logic is, in order to love another person as you love yourself, you have to bring out the neshama. And according to Kabbalah, that's the point of Yiddishkeit. To become spiritual people. To become neshama-centric people rather than body and animal-centric people. And there's another point. And the second point is to bring God into this world. Point A is to raise up the neshama. And the second point is to bring the Eibush into this world. And God has a very interesting method of operating. And that is, God is phobic to certain things. You know what phobic means? Right? You know the biological use of the word phobic, the physiological use of the word phobic? The opposite of phobic is philic. Okay? Philic means to embrace. Phobic means to push away. Right? A positive and a negative and a magnet are philic. Two positive, two negatives, they're phobic. They push each other away. Hashem is phobic towards certain things. One of the things which God is phobic to is arrogance. And another thing that God is phobic to is divisiveness, is splits amongst people. Nothing divorces God more, nothing frightens the Eibush away more, where people don't get along. So, if the second point of Judaism according to Kabbalah is to bring God into this world, the precondition to that is Jewish unity. So therefore Hillel says, Kol ha-Torah kula, all of Judaism in the mystical realm, on the mystical level, is that there should be love between every Jew and every other Jew. Because it invites, it's the philic environment for the presence of Hashem in this world. So the Torah says, love your fellow as you love yourself. And halacha would say that that's unrealistic. You can't love your fellow as you love yourself. It cannot be. But Chassidus says it's entirely realistic. Here we go again. All you gotta do, as if it's easy, is become a spiritual Jew, a Jew whose center is the neshama, the joy of Judaism that comes from the soul. Because on that level, we are all family. And you can love another person as you love yourself. And it achieves the two purposes for Judaism according to mysticism. Number one, to raise up the neshama. And number two, to bring God down. And God rests when we get along. My grandfather, who, like I said, I keep mentioning him, he passed away 2 years ago. He was my grandfather, what can I tell you? So I love him. But he was also a real sincere Jew who hated division amongst Jews like most of us hate poison. He would just run away from it. He was a man of incredible peace. And he always used to tell me that the proof that Jewish unity is so important is how elusive it is. You see how predisposed people in general, and Jews in particular, are to politics and to division. You appreciate how important it is. Because the forces of evil, I don't mean the practical forces of evil, I mean the spiritual forces of evil, know that if there is unity, the world will achieve wholeness. Mashiach will come. So he invests everything he has in dividing amongst Jews, because that's the most sure way to postpone the coming of Mashiach, to postpone the world healing, because it's the essence of Yiddishkeit, is this Jewish unity. And the key to Jewish unity, if you will, is to have unity within ourselves, to raise ourselves up, to become spiritual people, to become humble people, is a good way to put it. And he would often share with me a medrash, which is very compelling. It's a very powerful medrash. And I'll put it to you in these words. God has a weakness. The medrash says you can manipulate God. You can. God has a weakness. God has a point where he, so to speak, loses control. What is that point? Shalom. Peace. People getting along. And the medrash says there were two generations of people who are considered in the Bible some of the worst, one of the most evil people who ever lived. And not only did God not punish them, but he blessed them. Because as evil as they were, they had this one quality. There was shalom, there was peace in their times. And Hashem says, when people get along, I'm helpless. They were idolaters, they cursed God, they blasphemed God, they didn't believe in God. But between themselves there was unity. God was, quote unquote, helpless to punish them. The generation of the made the Tower of Babel, the generation of the Great Dispersion, Migdal Babel, they made the Tower of Babel. The whole point was to rebel against God. They were never punished. They were just scattered. Because though they hated Hashem so much, amongst one another there was brotherhood. And Hashem says, if people get along, even if they're evil people, sinning people, if people have between themselves shalom and shalom, Hashem cannot punish them. And the second generation of Jewish people, generation of Achav, time of the first temple. Achav was from the family of Amarim. They were the worst idolaters in all of the era of the Israelite kings. But there was no daltoria. They loved each other. They were nice to one another. Medrash says there was a famine in Israel, a terrible famine. And for 3 years, a Jew named Evadia was feeding 100 prophets. Achav tried to kill all the prophets. And Evadia hid in 2 caves 100 prophets. And he fed them for 3 years from Achav's own kitchen. In time of hunger. And nobody would inform. Nobody who worked in the kitchen would go to Achav and say Evadia is stealing food for 100 people in the middle of a famine. Because as much as they hated God, between one person and another there was love. The Medrash says Achav would go into war and win invariably. He was one of the worst men who ever lived. The Mishnah says but he had a blessed kingdom because there was shalom, which is a compelling message. And this is what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. Avas Yisrael is the key to Judaism. It's the key to Judaism because when you do it properly, that means you've revealed the neshama, and it's the basis. Which is the first point, and it's the basis for B'cheinu Avinu Kolonu Ke'echad Be'epanechad. The blessings of God on us has to do with our unity, which explains why it's so elusive. It explains why it's so hard, because it's so important. And yet it's so simple. It makes so much sense. You need God to tell you that people should get along. I guess you do. And it eludes us. We can do so many other things so well. And this is the challenge. And Alter Rebbe says, Nafsha Mika, becoming a spiritual person, is a critical step towards learning how to fulfill the mitzvah of Yihavta L'Lecha Kamecha. Love your fellows, you love yourself. Okay, now to finish, I have to repeat myself again, otherwise I won't be true to form. So here goes the repetition. The Torah says, V'yahavta, love your fellows, you love yourself. And the question is that it's neged achush, it's unrealistic, it cannot be. It cannot be. So of course there's two answers. The nigla answer, the halachic answer, the practical answer is that love does not mean to love, because you can't love someone if you love yourself. Love means to behave lovingly. The mystical answer, the spiritual answer, is love means you could love another person if you love yourself. How? Be a spiritual person. Very easy to say. And like I said to you before, a spiritual person doesn't mean people who go to astrologers. A spiritual person means one who rejoices in his spiritual identity, which is his ability to connect to Hashem and the freedom that it brings him and so forth. So when the Torah says love, on a practical level, this is a euphemism, it's an allegory, and on a mystical level, it's literally true. So this becomes the message of the Tanya. You have to love every other Jew exactly as you love yourself, or as you put it, as you love family. But then the Alter Rebbe asks a question. And here it becomes very practical. The question is, there is a concept in Jewish law about hating sinners, about hating quote-unquote bad Jews. Now I'll tell you a story. Chabad and the Chabad Rebbes have been long accused of being delinquent in this commandment, and they don't mind if you tell people about it. Somebody once came to the previous Rebbe, who lived in an age where there were many conscientious objectors. Today there are no Jews who are against Judaism in principle. Unfortunately, today there are so many Jews who are either against Judaism or apathetic to Judaism because of ignorance, because of a lack of continuity, lots of tradition, lack of education. But in the 20s and the 30s, there were a lot of Jews who grew up in frum homes, who went to yeshivas, who were very great scholars, who rebelled against it all. They really hated God and hated religion and blamed Eibishter for all kinds of problems, for every problem. And so many great rabbis had an attitude of complete condemnation. They had, they're outside the pale of Judaism. They have to be hated and despised, and even worse. And they brought sources from it from the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch. According to Jewish law, there's a category of Jew, let alone human being. Moiridim v'lo ma'alin. Moiridim v'lo ma'alin is the worst thing. You're not even allowed to help them in times of danger. They're bad Jews. You have to hate them. So someone once came to the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe in the 1930s and said to him, "You consider yourself a religious Jew, a practicing Jew. Here's an explicit law in the Shulchan Aruch, and you're violating it every day." He was involved with all kinds of people who didn't believe in God and didn't believe in Moshe Rabbeinu and didn't believe in Har Sinai, and they were outspokenly against it all. It wasn't just that they had their own personal opinions. They were anti-religious, that they would have it their way, every single Jew in the world would be secularized. And the previous Rebbe had personal relationships with these people, and he was warm to them, and he spent time with them, and he corresponded with them. So some rabbi came to the previous Rebbe and says, this is a violation of Jewish law. So the previous Rebbe told him the following. He says, the Jewish code of Jewish law has 4 volumes, 4 books. The laws of the everyday, the laws of kosher and treif and marriage, the laws of relation between men and women, and the laws of business. The last section of the 4 books of the whole entire Shulchan Aruch talks about this business. Rebbe says, I haven't reached there yet. I'm still busy with the earlier stuff. In other words, the Rabbeim in Hasidus, beginning to the Baal Shem Tov, and then as time has passed, this has become more accentuated, more emphasized, more of a priority. That Avas Yisrael, loving a fellow Jew, love yourself, is so important that there's no such thing as a Jew you cannot love. Even such a Jew that Judaism says you're not allowed to love him. There's a Mishnah, there's a Gemara Masechta Chagiga that says that there are certain people you're not allowed to. Shaita asal rachamov. The Gemara says a fool you're not allowed to have any mercy, not have any compassion for. Because the meaning of the word fool is ma'abed mashaneistimlei. He wastes the gifts he's been given. The Gemara says, who is a fool? Kosher ma'abed mashaneistimlei. He wastes the gifts he's been given. If somebody wastes the gifts he's been given, why should you feel bad for his waste? So the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe said, the Rashab said, can you imagine what kind of rachmanis, what kind of compassion you have to feel for a Jew the Torah says you should have no compassion for it. So the response is not to have compassion, but to have even more compassion. So the previous Rebbe was asked, how could you love people that the Torah says not allowed to love? And the Rebbe says, I haven't finished the whole Judaism yet. I'm still busy with the earlier section. And in the meantime, I have to love every Jew. This is a very important part of Hasidus. Hasidus, I suppose, has suffered for this philosophy, for this belief, because it does say in Shulchan Aruch, some Jews you have to hate. But Hasidus places everything on loving a fellow Jew. As you love yourself, I want to share a personal commentary. From my exposure, if somebody were to ask me, what has Hasidus done to change the face of Judaism? I would tell them, and I was entitled to one sentence, I would tell them, and I really believe that this is quite true, that Hasidus has shifted the center of Judaism from Judaism to the Jew. It's more about the person than about the religion. In every aspect, including our relationship with ourselves. Hasidus talks about the preciousness of a Yid above Yiddishkeit. And therefore in Hasidus, loving every Jew, no matter what, is a priority. So the Alter Rebbe has a second half of chapter 32 where he's asked the question, but doesn't it say in Jewish law you're supposed to hate a person who's a sinner and so on and so forth? Alter Rebbe says, slow down. And he takes you through a whole discussion. He says, yes, it does say in Jewish law, it does say in Halacha, it does in the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch, that there are certain Jews you have to hate. But let's analyze it carefully. Rule number 1. The whole business of hating a fellow Jew because they're not doing what they're supposed to assumes that you and them are on the same level. What's called in Jewish law, Am she'itcha b'teirav mitzvahs, chaverecha b'teirav mitzvahs. They're in your world. If someone is above you in stature, you can come on in. Your hood is working fine so far. And you go outside and ask the boys. Or if someone's in a lower station than yourself, he's less learned, he's less scholarly, has a different background than you are, that law doesn't apply at all. The whole idea of mitzvah l'smaiseh, hating a Jew who sins, is only assuming that you and him are on the same level, which excludes most people from most of us. That's number 1. Number 2, in addition to the fact that the whole idea that you can hate a sinner is only assuming that they're in the same world as you, there's a second clause. You try to direct that person, try to help them, try to teach them how to serve the Eibishter. To hate a Jew doesn't keep Yiddishkeit, Torah, mitzvahs, whom you have no relationship with and you've never attempted to bring close, is wrong. You have to try and show them the right direction. And the Gemara says, you have to continue showing that person even 100 times. So if the person is on your level, and you've given them direction repeatedly, and they haven't listened, so then you're allowed to hate them. So if that person is not on your level, either higher than you or lower than you, it's not even in the ballpark. It's not even in the discussion. Assuming the person is in your world, and you've showed them how they're supposed to behave, and you've encouraged them, and you've inspired them, and they refuse to listen, then you're supposed to hate them. And then the Alter Rebbe had, and by the way, what are you hating? You're hating the evil in the person. But every person has good also. You can hate the evil, but you have to love the good. And the Alter Rebbe says that no matter what that person's situation is, even if you're going to presume or assume that this person is, you are in a position to hate another person, you're hating only the evil, and you have to love the good in the person. Now, but I want to install here a point. Alter Rebbe says, let's say you meet a Jew who's not on your level. You meet him on your level. So you're loving him unconditionally. So it says, number 1, loving a fellow Jew, just being nice to another human being, brings people closer together. So if you love another person, it's possible that the love alone will bring that person closer to Hashem. If you will love another person, perhaps you love another person, you show another person that you don't love them for a reason, you love them genuinely, perhaps they'll come to it by themselves. And if they don't, you are fulfilling a mitzvah. It says no place in Torah love Orthodox Jews. It doesn't say that. It says love every human being, love every Yid, love every Jew. So even if that person is not in any way affected by the love you show them, you are doing the right thing. You have to love another person. That's the first point. Now, getting back to the issue we said earlier, presuming that there is a person that you are, quote, entitled to hate, unquote. I can't imagine a person who has that need, that urge, but okay, let's assume that it exists. So you have to hate the evil, and you have to love the good in them. And Alter Rebbe says, but you love the good, and you hate the evil, and on top of all that, you have to feel bad for them. You have to have rachmanis. Right? We have three primary emotions: kindness, severity, and compassion. So you have to love the good, that's kindness. You have to hate the evil, that's severity. And you have to feel compassion. He's never a failure. Right? So it becomes two against one. You're loving the person. You're feeling compassion towards the person. Those are positive emotions. Opposite the negative emotion of hate. See, Alter brings the Yankev Hashapodes Havram. These combinations of emotions affect that even the hate is very diminished. So Alter Rebbe leads you through this process, and he says, number one, if the person's not on your level, there's no business of hate, you can only love. Number two, even if you're hating that person, you have to first rebuke them, and it has to fail. And number three, even if you've rebuked them and it's failing, that you quote unquote following the Shulchan Aruch by being angry and hateful towards them, you have to hate the evil in them and love the good and feel bad for the neshama. So in the final analysis, Alter Rebbe says, yes, it does say in Shulchan Aruch you have to hate a fellow Jew, but if you hate a fellow Jew the way you're supposed to hate a fellow Jew, you end up loving him also. Because you're hating only the evil, you're not hating the person. But one of the commentaries you have in Chumash, is Oror Apam Ki Oz. Yaakov Avinu was angry at his sons Shimon and Levi. So he curses. He doesn't curse them. He curses their impulsiveness. He curses their anger. He curses their wrath. So later on in Chumash, when Bilam wants to curse the Jews, more Ekev Leikabe Kel more as I may be quoting the wrong pasuk, but Bilam says, even when God is angry with his people, he doesn't curse them. He curses their impulsiveness, their anger. He doesn't curse them. In other words, even if you're hating a Jew, it's not the Jew you're hating the evil within the Jew. And it concludes, Alter Rebbe does, by saying that we find King David says, Tachal Sinas Nason, King David said about certain people that he hates them absolutely. So Alter Rebbe says this is not spoken about the ordinary person, this is spoken about extraordinary situations. And the Rebbe has a commentary on this, and he says, first be King David, then you'll hate a Jew. First love a Jew the way you're supposed to love a Jew, and then you'll be in a position to hate another Jew. So the summary of chapter 32, Perek Lamed Beis is, the Alter Rebbe says, we have been discussing the soul, the neshama. But we're conceding, we're admitting that the soul has enemies. The enemy of the soul is the real world. The enemy of the soul is the animals. And as a consequence, even as a frum person, even as a religious person, we're constantly dealing with the question of Itzav and Aguf, or Simchas HaNefesh, the sadness of the reality of this world, the joy and the freedom that the soul gives. If we choose Simchas HaNefesh, we choose to live by the values and the priorities of the soul, you can love every Jew like you love yourself. And this whole business, this whole idea of hating another Jew, when you understand the laws correctly, you realize that there really is no such thing as a Yid hating another Yid. And this is the point of tonight's class, that the idea of revealing the neshama, which we've been discussing now for several classes, affects also the idea of Avos Yisrael. In other words, what I'm trying to say now is this. We talked about the soul a lot. And the Alter Rebbe is giving us, in my opinion, a variety of symptoms to what the soul is like. The first symptom that we had, what the soul is like, is that the soul is clarity. The second symptom is that the soul is joy. And now we have the third symptom, that the soul is love and unity. And mitzvah next week, we're going to discuss the fourth expression of the soul, which you have in this sequence of prakim, is that the soul is faith. Okay, I'll repeat myself. In the last few classes, we've had discussions about what it feels like to be spiritual. The first is clarity. The second is joy. Tonight we added the idea of love and unity. And next week we're going to talk about faith. Okay? Fair enough?